Hello and welcome to another week of the EMS Handoff Podcast. I'm your host, David.blevins, along with my co-host from North Carolina, the infamous, famous, wonderfully extraordinary Bradley.dean, who's hanging out at the North Carolina EMS Expo this week. Bradley.dean, how are you this week?
I'm doing great. It's a little rainy here. Good storm last night, but other than that, it's still a beautiful day in North Carolina.
Well, unlike our normal weeks with you that finds you out in the woods in the middle of those storms, you are in front of one of our awesome backdrops for any of us seeing at this conference. We've been doing these podcasts, and he's doing it up right this time. So if you are interested in having the EMS Handoff Podcast at your conference, let us know, because that's what Bradley's doing. Tell us about the North Carolina EMS Expo and give them a shout out.
So we're at the North Carolina EMS Expo. This is the 50th anniversary of the Expo. We've got some guests lined up this week. This evening, we've got one with us that was kind of a spur of the moment. We were able to grab him before he takes off to another conference. We've got Jason with us. We're going to introduce him in just a second, but we've got some other guests that are going to be on this week. And so you're going to see them in the coming weeks as we post them as part of our podcast.
All right. Well, let's go ahead. And before we introduce Mr. Brooks, we're going to go ahead and give a shout out to our podcast partner, the Journal of Emergency Medical Services. We are your source for all things EMS in the podcast verse, but JEMS has been an industry leader for many years. So make sure and go by and check out their website at jems.com. Give them a shout out. And you can also see our fellow podcast hosts on the EMS Today podcast. Give them a shout out as well. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. But we're talking about the EMS handoff today. And so, Bradley.dean, let's go ahead and get into the introduction of our guest for this week.
So today we've got Jason Brooks with us from Dt4EMS. So I'm going to turn it over and kind of let you give an introduction to yourself.
All right. Well, my name is Jason Brooks. I'm the president and CEO of Dt4EMS. Dt4EMS stands for Defensive Tactics for Escaping, Mitigating, and Surviving a Violent Encounter. That is what our company is called. We put on the programs called EVE, Escaping Violent Encounters. We have two programs. We have the Escaping Violent Encounters for healthcare providers, as well as, which is the in-hospital program, as well as our Escaping Violent Encounters for fire and EMS personnel, which obviously are pre-hospital providers. We've been here this week. We put on a pre-con course for the fire and EMS course this week.
So you just flew into North Carolina from what conference were we at before?
Just came from FDIC to here.
Okay, and you had a program there, and then you were doing one here.
Yep. So we were out there. We're actually out there on the vendoring side for there. Part of that, we really flew from Denver to there to here. We did speaking in Denver. FDIC for some vendoring, and then put on a program here. So yeah, we're literally hopping from conference to conference again.
All right. So one of the big things is, a lot of people are probably sitting back watching this and they're going, why in the world do I even need to worry about this? They're always concerned about, patients doing something or something happening, and they say, well, I'll just take care of it myself. I've got something in my hand. I'll be able to.
I'll whack them over the head with an O2 bottle.
Exactly.
The general statement, give them the big green pill, O2 therapy to the cranium, right?
Right.
All right.
So tell us, a little bit about the statistics and why we really need to be concerned, and then why that would not work.
Well, first, let's talk about just statistics. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, healthcare providers are 22 times more likely to be assaulted than the average healthcare worker. 22 times more likely. The unfortunate part is that we have a culture of assaults are part of our job. That's what we say. Well, I don't know. I've been a paramedic for just over 25 years now, I guess. I never seen that any of the place I've ever worked where it said assaults were part of my job, especially criminal assaults. And the simple fact is it's not part of our job. And a criminal assault should be something that we actually, one, we have the right to defend ourselves, but we have to defend ourselves reasonably. And that's one of the biggest problems is healthcare providers don't understand what is considered reasonable in their use of force. But with that being said, is the simple fact is it happens more often than most of us want to talk about or want to say that it happens. And we need to understand the difference between a patient and an attacker, because it's two different people. Because, well, let me ask you a question. Could a Alzheimer's patient who has dementia reach out and try to smack you, grab you, punch you, pull you?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I will go ahead. I'll go ahead and stop right there. I've used this example a couple of times. One of the most violent encounters that I had was a patient like that with my partner. It's the only time I've ever seen this individual who has a stature very similar to yours tell me to stop the truck and get the French language in the back of the truck with him because this 96-year-old woman was assaulting him.
Yeah. So in the same aspect, do you have the right to defend yourself against this elderly patient who's dementia?
Yes, but probably not the same as something else.
Well, so how about we give you skills that could work for either type of person, whether it's the elderly dementia patient or it's the drunk or drugged person who is trying to criminally assault you. Because we're the only profession in the world that has to determine patient or attacker in a split second of time. Think about it. If you worked at a big box store and somebody walked in and tried to assault you, would you have to go, oh my God, does this person, have low blood sugar? That's why they're acting out. Do they have a head injury? Or would you just be able to defend yourself? No different than if you assaulted a police officer, they would just defend themselves. Well, we have to determine, well, why are they assaulting us? And respond reasonably for that person. So we need to give you something that, again, you can deploy in a split second time that would work for either that patient or that attacker. Because our goal is to escape the violent encounter, not to submit, destroy, beat them up. It's to escape it. And that's what our goal should be. But the simple fact is the general public doesn't understand how often we get assaulted. When you say to somebody, that doesn't work in healthcare, oh my God, I got assaulted again. They're like, who would assault you? Who would assault a paramedic, an EMT, a nurse, a firefighter? Well, the simple fact is it's the dirty little secret to healthcare is assaults within healthcare by far. And it happens quite regularly.
Well, you may mention the statistic there, 22 times more likely than even the healthcare sector. So what other statistics do you have when it comes to those assaults, maybe in just healthcare in general? And then how does that translate to figuring out what it takes to escape that encounter?
Well, so the biggest thing is that a good 95 to 99% of our assaults are non-lethal encounters, meaning that they are being punched, kicked, struck, bitten, things like that in nature. So that's what we should be mostly preparing for. There's a lot of conversation around healthcare right now of saying we should give paramedics or firefighters firearms as a way to defend themselves, which I'm not saying that that's a right or a wrong answer. What I'm saying with this number is if you give somebody just a firearm, it's kind of like the proverbial, the only tool I have is a hammer. Pretty soon, everything looks like a nail, right? I guess if you look at it this way, it's no different than on your ambulance. If we took away every airway device on your ambulance, there's no more combi tubes, nasal cannulas, non-rebreathers, there's no more ET tubes. The only thing you have to treat a difficult to breathe patient now is a surgical crike. Only one of two things are going to happen. One is you're going to get really good at crikes, or number two is no one's going to have trouble breathing anymore. Because again, we have to give you tools to be able to handle all types of assaults. And since the biggest statistics of our assaults are non-lethal, we should probably start there. On top of that, if we start giving our providers firearms, then we got to deal with things like loss of neutrality. We're already being, dressing and looking more like cops because we're wearing, bullet resistant vests, things of that nature. So, now we give you a firearm. Is that going to cause more loss of neutrality? That could be a big issue there for that.
So we've talked a little about the dementia patient. Let's talk about, what do we need to train for with some of these other patients?
Well, so the biggest thing is first is recognizing the difference between a patient and attacker. So how do we know that? We look at their intent. Take what the person says plus their actions will give you a reasonable belief of their intent. So what is their intent? That tells you exactly whether that's a patient or attacker. So obviously, if we have the confused person due to a medical emergency, I would like to get rid of the term combative patient. because the term combative patient is actually pretty damning for us as a career. Because if we label everybody as a combative patient, if it's an actual criminal assault and you go to court and you're talking in front of the jury saying, the combative patient slapped me in the face, the combative patient tried to choke me, the combative patient, all the jury keeps hearing is the word patient. And to them, a patient is somebody that we hold their hands, we sing kumbaya, we make them better. So that is one of the things that they don't understand, is the fact that there's two different people there. So we need to recognize the difference between those two. Those are some of the things that we need to focus on. And if it is not an uncooperative patient, it's a criminal aggressor, that is someone who, again, our goal is to escape them, not take custody control, not beat them up, submit them, destroy them, is to escape them and then press criminal charges against them. Because statistically, if I assault a healthcare provider and nothing happens to me, there's no criminal charges filed, statistically, the next time I come in contact with another healthcare provider, I will assault them again. But this time it would be worse than the first time because there was no consequences, and it just keeps building. Again, statistically, it's a small group, a number of people who want to assault us. They just keep doing it over and over again, making it worse. So we need to recognize the difference between that patient and that attacker. That's one of the biggest first things we need to train on, is who's who. Now, when we talk about the next thing is what is a reasonable response? What is considered reasonable? Well, let's look at recent news. Did anybody here just see the recent article of the 6 DC firefighters who just got put on administrative leave after their video came out? So one of the things we teach in our program is the name Dt4EMS, that 4 in there actually has a meaning. There's 4 areas that you have to win in every single patient encounter. We call this the mind, the street, the media, and the courts. So the first thing is we're going to talk about is winning the mind. That's understanding the difference between a patient and an attacker and understanding what's reasonable at that time. When we talk about the street, that's the physical skills that work more often than not that are reasonable in application to escape the situation. Now, you notice I said work more often than not, because nothing's 100%. If anybody ever tells you, oh, this skill is going to work 100% of the time, they're lying to you. There's no such thing. When we talk about the media is broken up into 2 different parts: social media as well as mainstream media. The simple fact is social media is so powerful today that mainstream media reports on what's trending in social media every single day. Now, when we look at the media, how much of our day is caught on camera?
All of it.
Pretty much. They're averaging about 95% of your days on camera now. And if it's not because it's on a security camera or a Ring doorbell, a camera inside someone's house, what does every single person have in their pocket? A cell phone. And as soon as something happens, they pull that out and they start recording you. Well, when they start recording that, did they catch the first part of the action or just your response? Your response, right? So what happens if your response makes you look like you were the aggressor? Because this is the whole part. Now let's refer back to the video that I just talked about for DC Fire EMS. Did we see the part in any of those videos where the patient punched the firefighter?
No.
None of them. All they saw was the response, which, don't get me wrong, in my opinion, that response was 100% not reasonable. You can't beat the guy down and start kicking him with your steel-toed boots and stuff like that. But we didn't catch the first part. All right. Well, when we talk about media, is everybody's got social media. Everybody watches videos. You want to know what everybody else also has? An opinion. And so when they watch that, they look at it and they're like, oh my God, they're guilty. Even though we don't know the whole story, they're guilty. We need to look at the whole story of that. The last thing you have to win in is the courts. The courts are broken up in 3 parts: criminal civil court and a court of public opinion. Meaning, what's the general public think? What does your bosses think? Because could the court of public opinion persuade the court of law? It does every day, right? Every single day, because your court is made up of your peers. So when they watch these videos and they're like, oh my God, that was so wrong. That was egregious action that they did. Well, you lost in there. So you have to win in all 4 of these areas for every single violent encounter. And the issue is if you look at the DC fire video, technically they won their mind. They determined that this guy was an aggressor. Technically, they won in the street. They stopped the assault. They beat him up. They lost in the media because that was played on social media everywhere. Mainstream media picked that up every night. And they've already lost in the court of public opinion because their bosses suspended them. And the patient, the former patient, the charges against him have already been dropped. Because the simple fact is their reaction was worse than what they can prove he did. So could this end up in a legal battle in court? I believe so. I believe it's going to. I believe that he's probably going to end up suing them. That's going to be my guess. That's what's going to move to next. So in every single patient encounter, you have to win in these 4 areas. If you lose in just one of these areas, you've lost in your entire encounter. So we teach you how to win in all 4 of these areas in every single patient encounter, because it puts you in the best position of defense for your actions.
So let's talk a little bit more about a couple of things here.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got Dt4EMS.
Yep.
So let's say that, I've been, studying martial arts for the last, 10, 15, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've got my black belt. People think, oh, I don't need to go take that class. I've got all the skills that I will ever need. But for me, what I see this as one thing to train the person, the mind, but it does nothing to integrate the profession. So
every martial art is great for what it was invented for, which in general, these are to beat up, submit, or destroy your opponent. We have a very specific mission in healthcare. It's to escape the violent encounter. So if you deploy some of these skills you may have learned in, let's say, Krav or karate, and you beat up, submit, or destroy your opponent, well, many providers have actually done that, and they've found themselves against legal action. Again, being criminally charged with the assault. So everything's great for what it was invented for. We are extremely mission specific. We're teaching you to escape the violent encounter. At no point in time are we teaching you how to detain, restrain. We're teaching you how to escape the encounter, because that's where we should be at as healthcare providers. Our job is not custody and control. We work under this thing called consent of care. And in my 25 years, I've never had anybody agree to let me beat them up in healthcare. I've never had that yet. So we're very specific for that. Why in the street, a street fight is completely different. You deploy what you want there, but in our job, we can't be under those type of situations.
So let's walk through this. So I'm taking care of a patient. This patient, suddenly becomes violent, and I find myself in a situation where I need to get away. So let's talk through that whole process of it happens, and now I need to escape this violent encounter. Let's talk about the entire process from there forward.
So the very first thing we have to look at and realize is what have we determined? Is this a uncooperative patient, or is this a criminal aggressor? If it's a non-cooperative patient, then you still have every right to defend yourself. But that is when we would do restraints to do care for them. All right. Now, if we determine based on the things they say and their actions that they're a criminal aggressor, they want to harm us, your duty to act has ended at that point.
So once we determine that they're a criminal aggressor, the patient-provider relationship
has
no longer exists.
Has ended. Because we work under consent of care, right? Are they able to consent to give care but want to beat you up? No, it's not possible. So at that point in time, our job is to escape that violent encounter. We leave that scene. People say, and it's taught, I'm going to say inappropriately from basic EMT school, is we start out saying, patient safety is number one, or your provider safety is number one. You are number one. That's on chapter 1. Then we go to chapter 2. Chapter 2 talks about duty to act, duty to respond, patient abandonment, etc. So we kind of push the patient safety out the door, because as long as in class you say, scene safe, BSI, and I do my little jazz fingers, do we ever challenge that again to say scene's no longer safe anymore? So we need to, if we're going to challenge, we need to challenge that in school to give them critical thinking skills. But if they have determined that, I need to leave. There's no such thing as patient abandonment for this. You have every right to get to safety. And I'm going to tell you, even if you have equipment in the house and you need to leave and leave the equipment because it's unsafe, leave the equipment. Here's the thing. Equipment can be replaced. You want to know what can't be replaced? Our personnel. Our personnel are our most important asset in every ambulance service there is, or fire department. So that's your number one goal. We'll get the equipment back later. Now, when I say leave the patient, I don't mean go check yourself back in service and go take the next call. Is we leave that scene, we get PD to respond, let them mitigate that situation, determine if we're actually needed there or not, and go from there. We'll give care when it's safe. But as soon as your safety is in peril, your duty ceases.
So as an EMS administrator, one of the things I would also say is if you have to escape and evade and then retreat, get you and your partner out of there, yes, leave the equipment, leave all the stuff that's there. If you're in the ambulance, have your partner, if they're driving, when they get out of the ambulance, cut it off, take the keys out.
100%. So one of the things that now you brought that up, because it's a great topic, is why are we not deploying kill switches in every ambulance, vehicle or ignition override switches? There is literally hundreds to 1,000 ambulances a year stolen from scenes or from hospitals, things like that. Well, you look in New York, Yardia was killed by her own ambulance in New York 7 years ago. The guy who ran her over, who stole her ambulance, ran her over, was just sentenced to life in prison without parole just last week. Could something like this be avoided in the future by ignition override, take the keys out? Absolutely. We should be doing that on every single call. We talk about that in our program. I love that you brought that up.
And the other part of that is it's okay to abandon the ambulance.
Absolutely.
And let them have it.
Absolutely.
And make sure that you document as best you can what happened, the position, condition of the person when you left, and then the position and condition of them once you return.
Absolutely. And documentation is the biggest thing for all this stuff, because it also shows justification of why did you leave. We need to document all of the pertinence there of what happened, and be specific. The patient did quote, they said, "I'm going to effing kill you." You actually put it out there, and the exact words they put there in quotation marks. The fact that they were in your face, they were screaming, they were yelling, they had a gun, a knife, whatever it was, you document those things to, again, show the totality of the circumstances at that time and why you made that choice to leave.
Yeah. And then, so now we've left, we've returned, we document all the stuff. As an administrator, I don't know whether you have it in your policy or not. If a crew has to leave because they got assaulted, I think one of the best practices is for them to call for a second due to let them go back and take care of what law enforcement has had to deal with. So there's no bias in the care.
I would 100% agree with you. And we do talk about that also. The unfortunate part in today's atmosphere, sometimes we don't have a second due that can do it. It's such a shortage. So what we say is if you don't have a second due, get a supervisor. If you don't have a supervisor, PD better ride with you. Period. Because again, could this cause you to have a bias? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not that the providers are bad people. They're just now on guard with what just happened.
Well,
go ahead.
Let me ask one, because a lot of what you've discussed so far is the separation of yourself from this encounter. But there are some times where that evasion part has to come after some action to subdue the patient to evade. So what about when you get into those circumstances in which you may have to take action against the patient to facilitate that escape?
So I don't believe that at any point in time in a physical violent encounter, we should ever be subduing somebody at all. Our goal is never to take custody and control, and that's what subduing is. Using actions, using a physical action to create distance and space, absolutely. That's why we teach physical skills again for everything of the average normal attack that happens against us. We teach you how not to get punched in the face. Favorite quote out there: everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Mike Tyson. Number two is we teach you how to get out of if you're being two-handed choked, one-handed choke, two-handed shirt grab, wrist grabs, whether you're trying to be kicked, how to block for a kick, a rear naked choke, whether they have knocked you to the ground, how to do basic ground defense. If you are mounted, how to escape that mount. And we teach everything that is all of our normal attacks. And we've been tracking assaults for greater than 20 years now. Every single one that comes out there that's made public, we read about it. We find out and we interview a lot of these people who've been assaulted and say, tell me what exactly happened. How did they grab you? How did they do whatever they did? And we make sure that everything we're teaching works for all the things that are actually occurring. Because again, it's got to work more often than not, or what's the point in training for it? Is how we look at that. So yes, if you have to actually use physical force, because remember in healthcare, there's only two times we'll ever use physical force. One is during self-defense, and the other one is legal patient restraint. So legal patient restraint would be a uncooperative medical patient that we are, placing in restraints, not for a criminal aggressor. But yes, again, you document. And we actually have what we give every one of our clients, which is called a use of force form. So you use force. It's our assault response guide, assault response form, and it labels out. We spell out everything they need to talk about, which is what happened, what were you called there for, what was the size of the attacker versus the size of you, were they armed, were they superior numbers of people, etc. To paint the entire picture of why did you use the amount of force you used to make sure that it is reasonable. Once you fill out this form can work as your incident report. It can be your police report to give to them. And the good thing is that it's one form that works for all of them, for all things. So you're not writing multiple forms out. Because your use of force is truthfully how much force you use is based off of what we call size, sex, age, gender, skill level, fatigue level, whether there's extra number of people, whether they have firearms, etc., can decide on how much force you actually end up using. So it helps to label all that stuff out. And you document. Documenting is the best thing we can always do.
So to kind of go back, now we've had that encounter.
Mm-hmm.
The provider has escaped, evaded. They've the person's been taken care of. There's one aspect of this that we really haven't talked about. Once it's over, you talk about the documentation because it's not really over. So let's talk about what happens with that provider afterwards.
So the first thing is as soon as it's over with, obviously, I want to just touch on one thing before we go into this part is we need to make sure that every single assault is reported to both our supervisors as well as law enforcement. Again, because if you have a use of force and you didn't report it, could that come back to you later? That could be an issue. But the actual event is over. Is it really over for the provider? The answer is no. We need to talk about post-assault care. The simple fact is that we need to make sure that our providers are getting both the medical as well as mental care afterwards. So we need to understand that our providers are going to be changed after a violent encounter mentally. So you don't have to die to be changed forever. One of the things I like to use as an example is grab a piece of paper. If you're holding that piece of paper there, that clean, crisp piece of paper, that's you before you're ever assaulted. You get assaulted, we'll crinkle up that piece of paper. All right. Crinkle it all up. Is it still the same piece of paper? Actually, it's still the same piece of paper.
But it doesn't look the same.
But it's been changed forever, hasn't it?
Yes.
I can still write on that piece of paper, can I? I can still use it, but it's never going to be the same piece of paper ever again. I can try to smooth that thing out as much as possible. It's still going to have wrinkles. So what we need to do is, no matter what the severity of the assault is we need to give them mental care. Now, OSHA actually recommends that providers should get free and comprehensive care following an assault. Not just the provider who has been assaulted, but anybody who witnessed it, as well as any coworkers who may be affected by it. Now, they actually use the word prompt care. So what does prompt care mean? According to OSHA, you should be sitting down with doing a psychological consult within 24 to 48 hours of that assault. Max of 72 hours. Statistically, after 72 hours, providers will never go get help. I'm fine. It's over with. But is it really over with? No. 12 to 20% of assaulted staff members reportedly have symptoms of or full-on PTSD following the assault. 12 to 20%. One of the problems is us as healthcare providers, we don't see it ourselves. We don't see the fact that we've had these changes, that we now have hyperarousal around people. We're easily angered. We're jumpy, things of that nature. The fact that we don't give the same level of care we used to give is we don't see that in ourselves. Sometimes it takes our partners seeing that and saying to us, having that uncomfortable, hard conversation of, ever since that assault happened, I've noticed that you've become, kind of angry and irritable with people. You're short-tempered. You seem to be on edge. Have you talked to somebody at all? And getting past that stigmatism of, talk to somebody's bad. The simple fact is mental health is a good thing. It doesn't make you a worse provider. It actually makes you a better provider in the end. Statistically, we still have another issue with healthcare workers are still 10 times more likely to commit suicide than the average public. And it's because we're the worst patients ever. We're the worst patients by any means. Heck, when we're sick, we doctor ourselves forever until it gets too late. It's no different than the healthcare, your mental health is. We need you to feel comfortable going and talk to somebody. Because again, if you're not willing to care for yourself, explain to me how you're really willing to care for others. And this job is hard enough in healthcare because we see the worst of the worst in people. We see death, suffering, dying on a regular basis. And we compartmentalize that until it boils over. So we shouldn't be afraid to go talk to people, get that mental health afterwards. There's plenty of mental health out there. There's two different types of PTSD procedures out there. There's CBT, cognitive behavioral therapies, and then there's EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. In general, with this type of mental health, within 3 to 8 sessions, you start seeing a clinical significant reduction in the symptoms of PTSD. But we have to push our people to go get that help. We have to make sure, especially as administrators, as supervisors, that we are pushing them, say, hey, it's okay. We would like you to go get help. Go talk to somebody. Even if they determine that, hey, you're fine, you don't need anything, at least you talk to somebody. To me, I think this is extremely important and something that needs to be brought to the forefront. In all of our classes ends with talking about this post-traumatic care. Because we want people to walk out of there understanding that number one is being prepared is not the same as being paranoid. We're not worried that every single person is trying to hurt us. We're prepared for the ones who do want to hurt us, which is a small group. It's no different than surgical cracks. How often do you know a surgical crack in your career?
We've only done those so I've only done those 3 times.
Okay. But
in 27 years.
In 27 years. So, but you practice for it every single year, right?
Yes.
For the time that you may need to do it, right? It's no different than we practice for self-defense for the time we may have to use it. And when we walk out of the class, we give you access to skills videos for everything you learned in the class. So you continue to practice this stuff. Because if you don't practice it, won't be there when you need it. And then we end with understanding that, again, mental health is okay. It's a good thing. And we need to make sure that our people are being taken care of. Not just physically, but mentally. These are some things that I think are lacking out there, is we need to talk more about that stuff.
So I would encourage any EMS administrator that is listening to the podcast, or if you're a leader in your organization, make sure that you talk about this within your supervisors group, and then talk to your employees, because whether you realize it or not, assaults are happening in your organization with patients, and you need to be aware of them.
Well, the last statistic out there that came out says 61% of all assaults are never reported.
Wow.
61%. That's a huge number. And one of the problems is there's no universal reporting system out there. So if they're not being reported, I guarantee the number you do know about is way lower than the real number. And we just have gone to the point where it's part of the job.
So do y'all have a centralized reporting thing in Tennessee, David?
We do not. It's done individually at each of the services themselves, whatever their internal process is.
Okay, so we have a centralized reporting thing here in North Carolina that Joe Zalkin has been working on. I was hoping to get him to join us today, but he wasn't able to. So if you're in North Carolina listening, make sure you ask your administrators about that reporting system so that it can be captured and then that information can be looked at.
Yeah. There's actually states that are actually making some good positive changes. For example, California passed a CalOSHA law a few years ago, which has been kind of put on hold during COVID, but they're mandating every healthcare provider, whether you're a nurse, you're an EMT, you're a paramedic, you're a doctor, if you work in healthcare, you have to do a minimum of 4 hours of hands-on self-defense training. They've put that out there. But with that, they've also started mandatory reporting. These are good positive changes that need to be put forward everywhere, just so we can start to, again, reduce the amount of assaults. Because again, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the number one leading cause of lost time at work within healthcare is actually through assaults. Number one, more than back injuries.
So talking about, the assaults and everything else, I see a lot of agencies spending money on bulletproof vests when I don't see in the news that providers are getting shot. I see in the news that they're getting assaulted. Why do we not spend money training them how to escape and evade violent encounters?
I couldn't agree with you more. Now, I'm 100%, I back the use of bullet-resistant vests as a tool. It's not the answer. Because again, what are most of our assaults? They're not people being shot. It is people being struck, punched, kicked, stabbed. Believe it or not, a lot of our stabbings are with our own scissors. They take our own scissors and stab us with them. So if we're going to give people bullet-resistant vests, again, all that is a tool. It doesn't make it so you can go into unsafe scenes. So if we're staging for all our unsafe scenes, where are all these assaults happening? On our supposable safe scenes, right? So the vest gives you a layer of protection. So if we're going to order vests, we need to order vests that, one, obviously have ballistic protection, but how about stab protection? There's many agencies who are ordering these vests and, they're not even thinking about stab protection with them. So if they get stabbed, it's going right through the vest. So that gives them at least some blunt protection as well as stab protection. But again, it's just a tool. How are they going to mitigate this? If you don't train your staff are still going to respond. How they respond is going to be based on either training or lack thereof it. So go back to DC. You didn't train your staff how to properly respond. So they went back to their past experiences. So that was beat the guy up, submit him, destroy him. Instead of teaching them to, again, defend yourself reasonably and escape that violent encounter. Not try to take custody and control of that person. Again, we got to train in all these areas.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned something about, people getting stabbed with their own scissors, their own knives, stuff like that. So, as a word to all the providers out there, think about, that knife that you have clipped on that pocket. You're not trained in weapon retention. That becomes a weapon very easily. Knives have a utility. But I've also seen providers that have these little knives back here with little thumb handles. Look at the design, intent, and utility of the device.
Yep.
And I hear people say, well, I carry it for my own self-defense. They won't let me carry a weapon. Well, you're not trained in weapon retention. We're not trained to contain and control these individuals. We should escape and evade, and we can do that free-handed much easier than you can with a weapon in your hand.
Absolutely. And the other part about that is if you're using that tool as your weapon, well, one, are you trained in how to properly use that as a tool or as a weapon? In my opinion, agencies should have a policy that, of what people are allowed to carry, because carrying a knife as a tool is fine. as long as the utility of that thing is as a tool. But if it clearly is designed as a weapon, we've just opened up more liability. Because what's the chances of we are trying to intubate somebody, or we're working an extrication scene, we're going through a car window, and now we have no retention of that tool at all, and someone else takes it and stabs you with it. Again, that's what happens with a lot of these things. We lay our scissors down instead of resecuring them, or we have them hanging out of our pocket or stuck in the back of our belt loop, and they grab them and get mad and they stick us with them. So yeah, let's try to educate people on the reason why we have the things we have and how to safely retain these things, these tools. If you're carrying that knife specifically as a level of protection, I just think you're opening up the agency for a lot of liability.
And I agree. And I have seen providers do that, and I usually will say something to them because I feel it's my duty, whether they work for our agency or not, just to typically say, hey, what was the design and intent for the device that you're carrying? And, if it's for a weapon, well, North Carolina has general statute that says that you shouldn't carry a weapon. And that's left open to a lot of interpretation. Now, it would take the district attorney, wherever they're working, and the county they're working to push that issue because of the administrative code and general statute. But there again, you're opening up your agency for liability, regardless of whether you're in North Carolina or any other state and you're listening to the podcast.
Yeah, well, and here's the next thing is do you want to be that one person that the example is made out of? I hear providers say a lot, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. Until they're actually being judged by that 12. And then they're like, oh, this sucks. This is horrible. Again, how about we learn about reasonability and best practices so that you have options. Deadly force isn't always the best option. There's times when deadly force is, an option, but it shouldn't be our only option out there. I 100% agree with that part.
So, David, anything you want to add to the weapon piece?
Well, I absolutely love that last part, Jason. Because I think in a lot of the stuff, the media that you're talking about, whether it's social media, mainstream media, is about that deadly force component. And we see those aspects and not what is done between the majority. Like you said, I think you said 96 to 98% of the encounters we have are less than lethal encounters. And so, my thought process with that, especially when we're talking about weapons, is the weapons we should be arming ourselves with are those that de-escalate the situation verbally or physically. And I loved your correction about use of the word subdued earlier, because if you do have that DA, as Bradley mentioned, that is looking to make that name, that the fact that you're carrying a weapon on you can get you into an escalated situation going, hey, you went into this knowing that you were going to cause physical harm, and that they could say that that's a premeditated act. And, so very, very difficult terms in those. And so I love this conversation that you all have going on. I've just been sitting back here taking some notes, but that's, and I love the way, Jason, you've been mentioning this, arm yourself with how to talk yourself out, how to find, when I'm in the classroom, I make mention, I'm like, look, I walk into this room, I know my points of egress immediately, my primary point, my secondary point, and a tertiary point. If I have to go through a wall, I know what it's going to take. Now, part of that's my military side, and I did have some ability to have some education with an FBI unit when we're talking about evidence collection. So we talk to those close quarters, and you're always looking. But do you start to see people that are acting a little agitated and they start to move behind you? Why are you going back there? I want to reposition myself and get into that new view and start to learn all those different techniques, which are all embedded in your program.
Right. Because like I said, our program starts from the very basics of what is the problem? After that, we start talking about we call it escalation control, but same thing, de-escalation. Then we talk about, approaching that scene, pre-arrivals, approaching the actual scene, how to get out of the scene, cover versus concealment, and looking for that on a regular basis. Understanding how to take things like self-defense and turn it from a thought process into a thoughtless process. Because truthfully, if you take our class and you don't practice those things, and someone gets ready to punch you in the face, you're like, oh God, what did Jason teach me? Too late, got punched in the face. Is you have to turn self-defense from a thought process to a thoughtless process. No different than driving. We don't really think about driving anymore. We get in the car, we put in drive, we drive. A lot of times, how many times you gotten out of work after working a night shift, you drive home, you point your drive, we're like, holy cow, how'd I get here? Why did you get in an accident? Well, for one, we're all creatures of habit. So we probably went the exact same route as we always do. The simple fact is subconsciously we were paying attention because we have turned driving from a thought process to a thoughtless process. We got to do the exact same thing with self-defense. Self-defense is something you do every single day on every single call. As you walk in the door, you are paying attention to your surroundings and taking notes of things of, as you said, I love that one. I walked in. This is the door I came in, but if things go south right now, is that the door I should really be going out? Or is it the other door? Or is it that window? Or whatever it may be. Making these mental notes, because when the time of action happens, you're going to revert back to what you trained for. I love it when I hear people say, don't worry, you rise to the occasion. You always revert back to your lowest level of training. However you practice it is how you'll do it in real life.
You rise to your level of training.
Absolutely. You'll always revert back to that muscle memory. It's amazing. We hear it all the time. Well, if it really happened, I would do this. No, you wouldn't. You do exactly how you just practiced it. That's why when we do our class, when we grab a hold of you, we make you actually work the skill. When people leave our class, they're going to have a little bit of muscle pains from it because we make you work it over and over and over again until you get it right, so you don't get it wrong.
One of the situations that we have used, one of my instructors, he's like, this law enforcement academy would come in, and at the beginning somebody would come in and they'd pull a firearm on them, and that officer would disarm them, safe the weapon, turn around and hand it back to him. And so evidently in the field that happened, and the guy cleared it and handed it back to the guy. The guy had literally just pulled the weapon on him, armed, disarmed him, and he turned around and handed it back to him.
I actually know the story you're talking about. He was the guy would do it with his wife all the time. And his wife would pull a gun on him. He'd practice disarming her and literally hand it back to her every time. And he was actually at a gas station and a guy pulled a gun on him. He disarmed him and handed him the gun back, and the guy shot him with the gun. I know exactly what story you're talking about because it's all muscle memory. It's what you've always done. I'm going to do the same.
You want to know how many times I've jumped out of the side of a building to practice escape from a fire? Why? Every year we had to go on belay 25 times, come out the side of the building to test our system, and go back for recertification. Why? For that one chance that you get stuck. And we had some individuals that ended up with significant injuries. So we trained. Why are we not doing the same here?
Right. And that's what we should be doing. We should be, again, training our people and then keeping a minimum competency of your defense skills. And again, most of your defense skills are not actual, hands-on. It's the tactics to avoid using your techniques. Because if you use our tactics we teach in the class, you'll really need our techniques. And is that what we want in the first place? We don't want you going hands-on with people. We want you to avoid those situations altogether. And that's why our classes broke up the way it is, which is lecture, practice, back and forth. During lecture, we'll give you tactics. We'll give you the techniques because we know that there's times when we're going to make mistakes. We are going to put ourselves in a position that we shouldn't have been in, or we're just taken by surprise. So we give you the tactics to be able to get out of those get out of that, or excuse me, the techniques to get out of that for that. And again, it's continual practice. It's not a one time you take a class and you're good forever. Your safety is your responsibility. So these are things that you need to continue to practice and employ on every single call. Because do we ever know which call is going to be the one that turns violent?
Have no idea.
More patients are assaulted on our routine, fall call, shortness of breath call than it is that, getting called for the stabbing, the gunshot wound, etc. So we prepare for every call. Just the case we have to use it.
So it's important that providers, learn, the defensive tactics and how to escape and evade. It's important that administrators learn how to support their personnel. And in order to do that, I would recommend that people take the Dt4EMS course. And if somebody wanted more information or how to hold a course at their location or their conference, how can they get in touch with you?
So the easiest way is go to Dt4EMS.com. So it's DT, the number 4EMS.com. There's a contact us request form right on there. Put in your information. We'll generally reply back to you within 24 hours. And we can discuss the things we offer. We offer a couple different ways. We offer where we come there and we'll train your people for you. Or we'll come there and do a train the trainer program. So we're talking about the E4 Fire EMS class. That is a 2-day, 16-hour course. And a lot of people are like, oh my God, that's so long. Well, just in this podcast alone, have we uncovered how much there really is behind self-defense. It's not just about giving you a few skills. It's about giving you a whole lot of tactics within there and giving you time to practice those. Our Train the Trainer course is actually a 5-day, 40-hour course. Because I got to teach you the program, and then make you a resident subject matter expert in the material as well as the skills to teach other people. So we offer it both ways. They can have us just come in and train their people, or they can do a train the trainer program and then have their own trainers on staff to keep putting out people. We update our program at least once a year based on the things that are changing. Our society is changing regularly. And boy, we have such great new videos that are always coming out every single day of, hey, these are things that have worked. These are things that we definitely shouldn't be doing. We can learn from those. As well as, changes in incidences that have occurred. Inside of our program, we actually talk about what we call forever, it was called the 6 Ds. We now have changed that to 7 Ds. So the 7 Ds are our most potentially violent calls, but not necessarily always criminally violent calls. So things like diabetics, being things like domestics, drunks, drugged, desperate. The one we just recently added was disabilities, people with autism. Is how do we handle and mitigate those? Because we've had a very rise in assaults from people with disabilities. So how do we mitigate those out? So we've added that in there. So we're always constantly updating. And once you have your own trainers, you always get that information so that you're always teaching the most current stuff.
And I'm glad you mentioned autism because one of our guests this week is actually going to be talking about autism and how to interact with those patients. And
I think that's great and I think that's one of the things that we really need to start talking about with our healthcare providers, because they're misunderstood. And a lot of times our actions are what turns them violent, because we overload them with information. We get close to them, we touch them, we use terms of endearment against them, all things that incite them. So I think that's gonna be a great one to listen to.
So David, any final thoughts on?
So I think this is something that every EMS provider should take, and if not recertifying per se with the same organization, should be training these tactics and techniques regularly. We can become very complacent. And that's where we see all of these issues that occur. Just a couple examples. Many years ago, right outside a suburb of Atlanta, 4 fire department crew members thought they were walking into a simple chest pain call, And they walked in one after another. The guy closed the door and held them at gunpoint for 4 hours, wanting to take his own life. There are so many different circumstances, and that complacency is what places us in bad situations. In the hospital, yes, they have violent encounters that occur, but when you take a look at the unpredictability of where we are going to be, at any given time, the three of us can be on shift together, and we're like, hey, where are we going to go today? And we may hit one of those, but very unlikely do we know where we're going to be. We're going to be on the side of the highway. We're going to be in people's houses. We're going to be in clubs. We're going to be out. And at any given time, as Jason mentioned, you can have the grandmother, grandfather with Alzheimer's that takes you on, or somebody else. And you need to know these things just as well as you need to know airway, breathing, and circulation. It needs to be in your mind. You need to have the muscle memory from having done this over and over and over again, so that if a situation you think is fine turns around and doesn't go fine, you're able to go home at the end of the shift. But I want to harp on one last point that Jason made. If you're in one of these situations, you need to be asking for help, even if your supervisor or leadership is not doing that. It's like, this is not there. We need to become strong enough to go, I saw some stuff that I don't need to see. And as leaders in this profession, we need to be like, hey, we need to pull you off. Jason mentioned we're short of people working in our field currently. And it's really easy to say, hey, I need you to go take another call. But this person is his paper has been crumbled. And we need to iron that out as best as we can before we send him on another call. So I love the topic, and continue. I know you're traveling again in the morning. So Jason, I appreciate everything that you brought to us today.
It's an honor to be here. Honored to talk with you guys. And the biggest thing is getting the word out there that, there's training available that can help reduce and mitigate the chances of you getting injured or you having staff overreaction and injuring somebody else. So I'm glad to take the time.
So if you're an EMS administrator or a leader in your organization, I challenge you to work out the process internally. Reach out to Jason and the team at Dt4EMS, so your people can win in the 4 separate areas of basically training the mind, learn how to win in the street, train for the media, and train for the public opinion of the court.
Absolutely.
All right. And for everybody watching or listening to this podcast right now, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget that EMS Handoff is now releasing all of our previous episodes under our own name as well. So you can go to your favorite podcast platform there. And if you're interested in getting Bradley or myself or both of us to come to your conference, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach me at David.blevins at handoffmedia.com. And you can reach Bradley at Bradley.dean at handoffmedia.com. And we'll be more than willing to talk to you. So don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Feel free to contact us. And until next week, don't forget the value of your EMS handoff.